Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our webinar at Surrey Wildlife Trust for our Year for Wildlife. I'm just going to do a bit of introduction, hopefully as people filter in from the virtual waiting room. So hopefully people can hear me and we will get started. So my name is Amy Clark. I am the Director of Engagement at Surrey Wildlife Trust, and I really want to extend a really warm welcome to all of you joining us this evening. Thank you so much for giving us a small slice of your evening today, and thank you for joining us. So why are we here? This year, we've created an impact report to show our supporters some of the highlights of our year, and that's what we want to do this evening. The staff and the volunteers at Surrey Wildlife Trust work extremely hard and achieve a huge amount every year, much more than we can include in a report, but we hope that those of you that have taken the time to read it or will do in the future, we hope that you found it informative. Please do give us feedback if there's anything else you feel we've missed and that you'd like to hear more about. So this evening is about inviting you to hear about, in a bit more detail, about some of the projects that have been made possible thanks to you, our supporters. So tonight we're going to hear first from Ben Habgood. Ben is our nature-based solutions manager at the Trust, and he's going to talk about the work that we do on the Pirbright Ranges. And as many of you will know, Pirbright Ranges is owned by the Ministry of Defence, the MOD, and was really devastated by wildfire in 2022. We held an emergency appeal to ensure the welfare of the resident red deer herd were cared for, and that was answered most spectacularly by hundreds of you in that appeal for support. And Ben is here tonight to tell you a bit more about the rewilding project there and how the reserve is recovering after the fire and what we've been able to do. Then after that, we're going to hear from Katie Fielding. Katie is a nature-based solutions manager as well, and she's going to talk about the conservation grazing at the Trust, and in particular how this conservation technique is used and how we use that to benefit chalk grassland reserves, where we're looking to improve habitats for wild range of invertebrates and pollinators, which are really essential in the county. And your support that you've given us through our pollinator and our grazing appeals has really allowed us to continue this work and to protect chalk grassland reserves and really extend our grazing operations. So we'll hear a bit more about that. So during the webinar, you'll only be able to see and hear from members of Surrey Wildlife Trust, from the staff here, but you are welcome to submit questions, and we would love to hear from you what you have to say and any questions that you have for us. If you can use the Q&A facility, which is on Zoom, to post those questions, we will endeavour to answer as many as possible. We will have time for questions after each of the two presentations this evening. So before I hand over to Ben, I just want to highlight a few of the incredible achievements from 2023 to 2024. And these have involved staff, volunteers, our supporters, communities, businesses, and landowners. So a wide range of audiences really pull together to help our work and what we do and help have the impact that we've seen over this past year. Through our Wilder Schools programme, we've engaged nearly 6,000 families, and they have taken thousands of actions for nature to help connect nature in their local communities and to really pass that message on about creating momentum within these communities to make space for nature and to connect nature beyond the school grounds and beyond their gardens. We're also working in partnership with landowners and managing our own reserves so that almost 5,000 hectares in Surrey is managed positively for wildlife. And we're really grateful. We can't do this without the support of our 27,000 members in Surrey, and also for our volunteers who put in a staggering 28,000 hours of their time in this past year to help. And if we break that down, that's actually the equivalent of 15 extra full-time members of staff. And that is quite significant for us at Surrey Wildlife Trust, and we have around 100 members of staff. So you can see there's a huge thanks that go to our volunteers and supporters, without who we could not do the work that we do. So thank you for your support. We're very grateful in whatever way you are or have supported us in the past or intend to do so in the future. So now I'm going to pass over to Ben Habgood. Ben will present and then we'll pause for questions. So again, please do feel free to submit any questions you have about Surrey Wildlife Trust, as well as any questions on Ben's presentation. So I'm now going to hand over to Ben.
Thanks very much, Amy. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. And yes, I'm going to be presenting to you about Pirbright Ranges and the work that we've been doing post-fire recovery, as long as the maintenance as well of the reserve, and what we've been doing for the last couple of years with the project. So yeah, without sort of further ado, I will kick off with that. Just to let you know that there will be a few videos in this presentation, so hopefully we get a little bit of audio at the same time. Yeah, hopefully I'll walk you through what's been happening over the last couple of years. So for those who don't know, Pirbright Ranges is a really large, extensive area of lowland heathland and woodland, coniferous woodland as well. This area here in the red is the boundary for the site. It's 750 hectares within the range danger area. We often call it the RDA. And as you can see, it's completely out of bounds to everybody. Members of the public haven't gone in there since the 1970s. And we've been managing this area on behalf of the MOD and the National Rifle Association since 2010. Amy alluded to this. The project is actually a rewilding case study, and we have our herd of red deer inside the RDA, managing the priority habitat that is lowland heathland. And
sorry, Ben, can I just jump in there? Are you? We can't see the seem to see the presentation on screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. I will jump back. Apologies.
That's okay.
Let's try again.
That's great.
Can you see that now?
Yeah, perfect.
Apologies. Sorry about that. Not quite sure what happened there. Sorry. So as I was saying, the map here shows the RDA, the range danger area, the red line, and this is all out of bounds. We are on the edge of Pirbright, where our main office is actually, just south of here. And to the north is Barossa, dry training area, where Sandhurst Military Academy is. And to the south of here is Ash Ranges. As I was saying, it's a rewilding case study, an extensive lowland heathland valley mire system. And we, before the term rewilding was really knocking around, certainly seems to be the theme at the moment. We have been, rewilding areas of lowland heathland with our deer. So it's a pilot for a lot of organisations, including Natural England, ourselves, and it still is a unique project. There's nothing else like it. No one else doing what we're doing with regards to red deer. So that makes it a very unique pilot and case study for other organisations. I thought I'd just show you this. This is actually the first time our red deer were released into one of the paddocks. This is Hagthorn Paddock. And this young man over here is James Hurd. He's now our Director of Reserves Management. And this man here is James Adler. He helped basically kickstart this project, was fundamental in the development of this project, working with the Ministry of Defence. And that was a really historic moment where we released a load of stags from Warnham Park Estate, as well as 22 hinds in March. So 2 mature stags, one of which was that one. And then later on in June, we actually had some calves as well, which are a bit unexpected. So we started off with a very, very small herd. But I'll come back to the herd in a bit. What we're really here today to talk about is the wildfire that happened on Pirbright Ranges in 2022, starting on the 4th of July at night and lasted for 6 weeks. It sort of extended across the whole of the RDA, the range danger area, over that time, fizzling out and then kicking up and starting up again, going right to the boundary. The fire service can only fight the fire from outside the RDA. They can't go inside and fight the fire. So it's a watching brief and seeing where it moves to, and then protecting those areas and moving around. You can see the area that I showed you before was the red line boundary. This is the burn area as well. So approximately 96% of the site was burnt. and that did burn in severity. So it was quite a severe fire in that it was very slow burning. It went quite deep into the soil. Not that there's a huge amount of soil on the area, because it's very, very shallow and very free draining. But what happened was the seed that was in the soil that you normally rely on for regeneration did take a battering and was damaged. So it was an extensive burn. Some areas burnt twice because bracken fell down and caught alight again, and because the fire service couldn't get in there, they couldn't damp the flames down. A lot of infrastructure you'll have seen and heard about, the releases we talked to you about with regards to why we were looking to raise additional funds for the project, because all of our infrastructure was damaged. Around 3.85 kilometers of our fence line infrastructure was damaged. This one here, this picture, is actually a sleeper wall that we have to protect our fence line going in, and that on the right hand side is what we were left with, a 45-meter gap where the red deer could come and go within the range floor and the rest of the RDO. So we had to respond very, very quickly. Literally, this is during the wildfire event was going on. The site is still on fire at this point. And this is the sort of the extent of the devastation. This is taken from Stickle Down range floor, which is a range that sticks out into almost the middle of the site. And you can see the extent of the damage there that happened. And then since then, we've been having lots of trees come down. So this is an oak tree that you would think is pretty resilient to fire. You can see the canopy is completely dead there and dying back. What has happened is the fire's got into the ditch network in there. The areas of grassland as well slowly burn, and then over time these trees have succumbed to damage. So not only during the wildfire event, but since then, 2 years down the line, and is still happening. So we are still being negatively impacted by the damage and the scale of the fire. And because those ditch networks are unattainable, you can't get to them, then the fire could continue to burn for literally weeks on end, which makes it a very, very unique situation compared to areas that are very accessible to the fire service and members of the public. Other terms of response with regards to welfare is that this is an unprecedented event for us for the red deer. The red deer were inside when this event happened. We had procedures in place and plans in place, including having the 2 paddocks that were there for safeguarding the deer. If there was an event like this, they were opened up and made available to them. But we also needed to ensure they had enough food, not during the wildfire event, but actually after the wildfire event. So feeding them was a really important part of that, making sure we had enough food to overwinter. So that winter in 2022-23 and beyond as well. And this video, while it's going on in the background, is just another demonstration of the sort of levels of monitoring that we put in place. So we put 8 camera traps up around the site to capture what was going on with the deer. Because it's a live range and there's lots of military activity as well as lots of shooting, we can't see the deer all the time. We get around about 30 days access a year to manage the deer, to inspect them, to see what's going on. So remote cameras are really, really important. And the reason I brought this video up as well is this is a group of mixed young males and mature males in the middle of, well, coming to the back end of winter. They're about to lose all of their antlers. You can see some of them are already cast. Some have still got their antlers on. But just in the background here, not very clearly, but there are some troughs out here, some plastic troughs with maize in. And after consulting with our veterinary consultant, Peter Green, it was thought we do need to bring these deer in to see how they're doing with their health. We can check their body conditions, their fat conditions over the winter, their coats, any welfare issues. And we put the maize out to see if they would be lured to it. They weren't bothered at all. So parkland deer normally will go straight to those troughs and feed from them. Our deer are incredibly wild, although they are our parkland stock. They are now a completely wild, enclosed herd and behave very, very naturally, and the behaviors are very different. So they won't know what maize is. So that's a lesson for us, although the food is available. More photos of infrastructure, as I mentioned before, trees coming down, softwood, coniferous woodland coming down onto our fence line. This is actually our southern fence line, which stops the deer wandering onto the range floors. This was happening all the time, and you can see more coming down. We've actually since done some proactive work on that. And here is our team doing that proactive work. These lovely guys and girls are from the estates team, and we did a team estates day out on Purbright Ranges, and we were removing lots of dangerous and dead trees from around that area so that we won't suffer the same damages on our fence line, and to maintain that fence line long term, as well as increasing wildfire resilience in the future as well. So it's not just the deer, but we have to put some other measures in place as well. Some of the infrastructure that we've replaced, as well as within the paddocks themselves. So this is Hagthorn paddock to the northeast of the site, and these paddocks are really, really important for us, critical for the long-term welfare of the deer. All of the fence lines burnt, and we had to replace them in sections. Most of them are made out of wood, like these ones are shown, and that's because to keep costs down, as well as the sensitive sites. So bringing in chestnut instead of treated material. However, we have, where we can, ensured. So the picture on the left hand side, this is, for those who are familiar, is Folly Bog, or the boundary to Folly Bog, which is part of Brentmore Heath to the north, which the Adam Bolton, my colleague in the West team, manage. This is an area that was burnt, and the wooden fence line, along with the stock fence for the cattle, was burnt. And there was an opportunity here, because it crossed the Valley Mire, to put in Clipex fencing. It's more expensive, but because it's metal, it's more resilient to wildfire. So if and unfortunately, likely when we do have another fire in the area, that fence line will stay intact, so we won't have to be so concerned about deer escaping, and also members of the public wandering as well. So we have also upgraded our fence line as well with your help. Some other images I mentioned before, just reactive work. So this is a month after the fire. So what we were finding is all of the Scots pine trees, this is actually in Hagthorn paddock, were slowly catching fire and a chimney effect. And you can see them coming down. So even though the fire has come and gone out, we are still having to reactively go out and make good those fences. And we were about to change that fence line and put it back in place, but the trees were still coming down, so we had to deal with those trees at the same time. I won't dwell on this too much, but this is just our response in numbers, to give you the context of the sort of response we've had to provide over the last 2 years and still ongoing. As I mentioned before, 3.85 kilometres of fence line being replaced, improved, for our own internal use and also external use. Veterinary consultation has been part of that, welfare checks with external bodies as well. The amount of hours that have gone into this is quite extensive, and that goes into some other species as well. Reactive work with regards to scrub and tree management, we've had to deal with, along with contractor materials as well. So that's just a real snapshot of the enormity of the scale of the response we've had to do outside of what is our normal working practice. So we're very grateful to our stakeholders and partners for helping us with that. Leading on some more positive news, this is a photo taken after the fire. This is actually earlier this year. This is with Bella, who's recently joined our team as well, helping me with the project. And this is Matthew in the West team, and they're doing fixed point photography, capturing the change over time. And that has been in place before the fire, but we're picking up and adding additional areas as well, so we can track the changes over time. Another opportunity for us, slightly aside for this response, but this is working with UKCEH, the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, and this is an AMI system, an automated monitoring of insect system that is being piloted with us. We have 2 of these systems out in Purbeck Ranges at the moment. We're just about to bring them in, and these are AI generated moth traps that are capturing and videoing and recording to some percentage of certainty the moths that are attracted to it. It's completely isolated, remote monitoring, and we're seeing how that goes. The reason it's got a Harris panel around it is to keep the deer from knocking it over and damaging it. Some really interesting images now coming through about the recovery of this. This was earlier this year in May. So this is, you can see just coming through here, some heather, some ling coming through. And this spaghetti looks like the sweets you get, the licorice, the shoelaces. This is what's called common dodder, not so common here, literally hectares and hectares, so rugby pitches in size of this plant species, absolutely everywhere. And this plant is a parasite, a true parasite, and is responded really well to the conditions that it has no competition, basically. So it's benefited as a silver lining to the fire, and is responding well. Another species that has been surveyed is the heath tiger beetle, one of the rarest invertebrates on the planet, and we surveyed these this year, and there are 8 of those on the site, which doesn't sound very much, but it is actually really significant as a nationally important species, incredibly rare species associated with lowland heathland. Some nice photos here of the valley mire. This is Hagthorn Bog, and you can see common cotton grass there in the background, and bog asphodel in flower as well. The valley mire systems are relatively intact. The fires luckily went around and flashed over the top, so we don't think we had deep peat burning, but we're not 100% sure because of the access we got. But you can see from a vegetative point of view that those plants are relatively intact and will bounce back over time. There has been some vegetation change. Some other fantastic news, I can't shout about this enough. Working with, this is Holly Stanworth on the left-hand side. This is Species Recovery Trust, working with, again, Arabella on the right, and they are marking on the ground marsh club moss, which is actually a fern. Again, one of the rarest plants you can find, and as a result of this year's surveying work, we have 8,500 plants that we surveyed for. And the really interesting, amazing thing is this photo in the middle is showing you deer slot tracks. And what I mean by that is footprints that deer create, the slots being their toes and their feet. And that it is a highway for both sundews, which are the little red plants in the middle, and the marsh club moss, which are these little fingers coming out here, which are kind of sandy color and also green. You can see that all the way through. That population makes it one of the most important nationally in England. So an amazing output from surveying work this year. Mike Waite, our colleague, has surveyed for rusty hook moss. I would have walked over this species not knowing what it is. It's a locally important species that has been surveyed as well. Again, looking at the response of the valley mire system, having the opportunity to survey for these plant species has been really important. The late and great James Adler took some photos of marsh arrowgrass, again another really important species that is doing really well, thank you very much, out in the middle of the valley mire system. And thanks to his great work, we've been able to go back this year and resurvey that, and despite the fire, the population is really, really stable and actually is increasing in some places, and the deer are making that habitat suitable for it to spread, which is great news. Other good news, common milkwort and heath milkwort, this beautiful little purple flower on the left-hand side, and lousewort, which is a very low spreading acid-loving wetland species, which you can see here. Again, this is a deer slot track that is going through here. Both these species have responded well to the deer being present, and also as a result of the fire, they have had less competition, so they are coming back in really impressive numbers. And this is taken earlier this year, the 5th of August, I think. So this is what it currently looks like in some of those areas. For the last year and a half, that has been black ground. So now we have some vegetation coming back. So the area is recovering, but very, very slowly, like I said. So this is all of the ling heather that you normally associate with really dry heathland conditions. Something that is really important in the management of Purbeck ranges is the impact of the deer have, and that's on vegetation. And you can see this is the impact that they have on Scots pine. So they nibble at the top bit, and slowly that plant dies, and also they're thrashing at the base with their behaviors, with their antlers, the males particularly, and when they bark strip. Roe also are out there as well doing their job. So actually this is damage in woodland, but out in open heath, and this is really important. This is decay, and this is what we need the deer to do long term. Just a little bit, because I will go into the deer now. So what I'm caveating here is saying by young, what I mean by that is not 3 years old, not yet 3 years old. This is a calf, this back end of a calf here. This is this year's calf. This is a mature, so not yet 9 years old. This is its mother, that's the hind. And then over here, you've got a young male, basically. So he's not yet 3 years old. And over here, this old chap, he is over 9 years old. So just bear in mind when I say young, mature, and old. So over on the left-hand side, old. This one here is old. He's probably just about getting on for the end of mature into old. And these young boys here and this female, they're moving into the young space as well. Just on that as well, just to say, this is what we had. GPS collars used to be on our deer when we reintroduced them. That video that I first showed you. We don't have GPS collars on anymore. We cannot put GPS collars on our herd now because the stress that would bring to the deer. So we don't want to do that. So we have to rely on other sensors, which I'll go on to. But just to give you a really good idea of what the deer were doing when they were first introduced, they were in the paddocks. This is the hagthorn paddock I was mentioning, and down in the south, lots of wet woodland down here. So this is where our lead stag was spending most of his time in September to October in 2011, and then he went out and prospered all across the site. The female lead hind spent most of her time around hagthorn and didn't actually venture out very far. This behavior is really important to us with regards to management. This is the management intervention for lowland heathland for us, where they go. Currently, our herd don't have access to those paddocks, so where are they going? So what we are now doing is working with an external consultant. Ben Harrower is the chap here, looking very serious, pointing at an iPad. He has set up a wildlife consultancy using thermal drones and sensing and aerial photography. We've been working for the last 3 years. And we have been able to map and identify all of our deer using remote sensing and drones. This is a technology that is fast evolving and it's relatively expensive at the moment. It will come down in price, but is so effective and efficient. And just to give you an idea, this is one of the drones taking off. We had 2 at any one time flying over the estate. Previously, we would work with our stakeholders and our managers. So Defence Deer Management we work with to manage the deer, the MOD, as well as the National Rifle Association. And we would walk over the site or walk over some over the site with 30, 40 people, maybe 2 or 3 days it would take us to census the deer around March and April. Using the drones, it took us half an hour to locate and identify the entire herd. And I'm just going to show you a video of that. So this is taken from our census in winter. And what we're doing here is looking at this is the drone live, and it will flip between thermal, which is now thermal, and aerial. So we can identify each individual deer, look at welfare, look at the sex, look at the behavior in the group and how they move. And then we can identify individuals in thick scrub that we can't see visually, and then track them. And we can also then add a point on our map with global positioning, GIS, to say there are 3 hinds here, and then we'll move on and say there are 6 hinds here. And so within a very, very quick period of time, we can identify all of the herd and see where they are. You can identify grey squirrel in a tree. So picking up these large deer is no problem at all, because they're kicking out a really big thermal print. Now, just to say, this is a really important part of how we manage our deer and our welfare, and understanding how the deer respond to, what are they eating, how are they behaving, how's their body, responding in parasites and everything else. So this next image is one of a deer carcass being inspected, one that's been selected by a veterinary consultant. So it's a warning to say that this image is of a live deer is open, but I think it's a really important one. If you don't want to see it, then I can let you know once I finish that slide. So just a heads up. So here it is. This is our veterinary consultant, Peter Green. He is one of the leading authorities on red deer and parkland deer. And he is inspecting this carcass for any signs of malnutrition, looking at welfare, condition, fat content, liver content, looking at parasites, taking blood samples, taking muscle tissue samples, looking at fecal count in the eggs, looking at the head, looking at the teeth, at wear, because when you have a sandy ground, the teeth wear quicker. So looking at absolutely everything for the deer. This is incredibly important. That's why I put this slide in. It's not nice to see, but it's an important part of the management of the deer. This is really, really important for us. So nicer photos now. So this is our camera traps that we deployed, as I mentioned before, capturing our deer now. This is earlier in the year last year, but actually almost to the date when we had the fire, a year on. You can see the ground is burnt. There isn't much to eat here. And so this single sex herd, that's how they move around in the winter, is all our young males, and they're just growing their antler they're called in velvet, and they're establishing that and growing that on. Really important to us are our calves. Here are our calves here, our little red calves, little spotty coats that they've still got, they're clinging on. These little ones are about 2 months old in this photo. There's mum in the background. There's probably mum behind us somewhere. They're very important. Here's a nice video of some nice interactions with our young calves, and this is how they behave as a herding group. They herd together. They're exhibiting their natural behaviors. This is a place in a valley where they can relax. Mum can chew and get on with her looking after herself and grooming herself, and these little ones can play. So this sort of behavior is really important, and they're also creating beneficial areas of bare ground while they're doing that. Here's another one. This is probably our youngest image. This is from this year. Ignore the year, for some reason it didn't calibrate. This is this year, and this little calf over here is probably literally only a couple of weeks old. I think this is the youngest little calf I've ever seen via imagery. So it's lovely to share that with you as well. They're really important. They're really important. And then there's this big boy as well. This is taken a couple of years ago, and this is actually on an area where we identified there was a lot of damage going on in the woodlands. And I'll just be quiet a minute because hopefully you might be able to hear this. You can hear a call there, and it's in rut. So this is in rut, and this is the sort of damage that they do on trees, marking their territory, thrashing, and also this is a wallow in front of it too, where they bathe and urinate in and do all sorts of lovely things. And now this is where we are currently. So this is this year. This is the rut a couple of days ago, and this is a young mixed herd, a relatively young male here stag, older hinds, younger hinds as well, even calves in their winter coats. So a real nice snapshot of the herd structure, and the rut is now happening. So they were grazing and browsing. They weren't that interested in me, and moving happily on. I'd also just say that we all have handheld thermals as well. And I put this in because when I came across this at 6 o'clock in the morning, I thought, oh my goodness, am I looking at a dead deer? No, I'm not looking at a dead deer. He was alive and well. He was just a bit knackered. So this is a young stag in a little group of males. And he was just a bit tired in the morning, having a chance to lay down and rest up. But all assured, he was absolutely fine and just getting ready for the morning's rut. And I thought I would just finish on one of them having a wee, because I thought that was an interesting thing to see. These boys are normally now covering themselves in urine, like I said. So actually sort of thermally seeing that heat exchange from a deer to the ground, I thought was interesting. But yes, that was it. And I shall leave it there. And thank you very much for listening.
That's great. Thank you so much, Ben. So please do submit any questions that we've got that you would like to. We've got one question at the moment, Ben, which I'll read out to you shortly. But if anybody else has any questions, please do feel free to pop them in the Q&A and Ben will answer those for you. So Ben, the question that we've got is, are firefighting aeroplanes not available for situations like the wildfire when you can't get access from the land side?
Yeah, very good question. And I guess to kind of caveat that as well is that the fire service were deployed for about a month. Sorry, fire and rescue in and around Purbright Ranges during the wildfire event, and came and went actually, and then were deployed on Hankley. For those who remember, Hankley actually caught fire, about 6 hectares burnt, and in that short period of time, there was an aerial response. Yes. Lessons can definitely be learnt from this. It's definitely something that we're considering as an organisation in how we impart that information. And actually, one of the pieces of work we are doing with the Ministry of Defence is looking at a landscape scale wildfire resilience plan. The difficulty, obviously, is that the Wildlife Trust doesn't manage the rest of the MOD estate, nor does it manage the National Rifle Association's estate. So the response has to be measured. It can't be the Wildlife Trust leading on that. But absolutely, there are better measures put in place. But actually, what we're really focusing on, and the deer aren't here necessarily to stop the fire, they're there to help reduce the impact of the fire and to maintain the habitat as lowland heathland, is what preventative measures can we put in place, working with all the stakeholders to learn from this issue, because we've had wildfire here before in the past, in the 1970s, in 2003, 2010, before the deer were here, and now the deer are in the RDA, and the fire happened in 2022. So there is a theme there, and because we're having a drier climate long term with climate change, we need to also make this climate adaptive. So yeah, there's always more to be done there, and it can only be done by working together in partnership.
That's great, thank you, Ben. The next question is, colleagues working on this project with you, are they mainly ecologists? So this is from someone who's a recent graduate trying to get into practical conservation. So just a general question, you know, how big's the team? What kind of skills does the team have that you're working with?
Great question, love that. Yes, so because of the nature of the site, because it is a site that is out of bounds to the public, only the Wildlife Trust can go on there with approved contractors at times as well. We can't take members of the public in there, sadly, so we are thinking about how we can involve people more in that. With regards to ecology and things like that, yes, well, the team is me, and I mentioned my colleague Arabella, who's joined us. She's been with us for a year, but in isolation, that's how we manage the project, working with our partners and Defence Deer Management I mentioned before, the Ministry of Defence I mentioned, and the National Rifle Association. But actually managing the deer, there are only about 3-4 of us doing that. But outside of that, working through our network as an organisation, I showed you a photo of our estates team working with us. So they come out and help both monitor and manage the site where we need to react to certain things. Our ecology services came out to do some of the survey work this year as well. So heath tiger beetle I mentioned. The marsh arrowgrass was a survey that was done by our ecologists as well. So all under our supervision around access and everything else. The real interesting thing moving forward with this project, and the interest in it as well, is that university students are very interested in the project, and we're trying to look at ways at how we can involve more people in it, but we still have to safeguard the security of the site. The main use of the site is a live range, and we can't enable any greater access. So how can we think more smartly about that? And I think certainly with regards to the AMI system I mentioned, with automated monitoring, remote sensing, using drones and camera traps, there's a huge amount of data there. And although we may not be able to walk over the area, aerial imagery is certainly playing a part in that. So there's definitely more we can do to learn about the positive impacts that the deer are bringing to Pirbright ranges.
That's great, thank you, Ben. Another couple of questions from a couple of our attendees this evening. How did the wildfire start?
Yeah, that is, I can answer that very easy. We don't know. So we don't fully know. So the thing I should say about wildfires in response is the Wildlife Trust are not trained to combat wildfires. Myself and Adam, my colleague I mentioned before, we have got a certain level of training, but this is all about prevention and planning. So when it comes to responding to wildfires, we were there to look after our deer and to record the impact it was having, both short and long term. We obviously didn't know what was happening, so we were just working with the stakeholders. The response is led by the Ministry of Defence and Surrey Fire and Rescue. How it started, like I say, we don't know, but with every wildfire that we've come across and are aware of, it has a level of human interaction. So we don't know. We know the first records of it coming through were in the evening and at night, and it was slightly confusing when the message came through first where exactly it was. And because people can't get into the range, it's hard to pinpoint exactly where that fire started. But it would have been very small. And then it would have, because there was no wind and the conditions stayed like that for the duration of those 6 weeks, really, the fire just smoldered away. So yeah, I don't, unfortunately we won't know. And because there's no property, thankfully no property, and no people have been hurt or killed or injured, no deer were recorded as being impacted or dead. And with regards to investigation, yes, a large area of highly designated habitat sadly burnt in the middle of summer when everything is breeding, literally thousands of species would have been impacted. There isn't the requirement to investigate from the local authorities' point of view. So unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you for that.
Thank you, Ben. At that point, that brings us to the end of our Q&A session for Ben. There will be another opportunity to ask questions at the end of the webinar, so please do drop any questions that you've got, either about Surrey Wildlife Trust generally or about Ben's presentation in the Q&A session. We will answer those. So thank you very much, Ben, for that, and I will now hand over to Katie Fielding for her presentation. Thank you, Katie.
Brilliant, thank you, Sarah. I'll just share my screen. Can someone just let me know that they can see that?
Yes, we can see your slides. Thank you, Katie.
Perfect. So good evening, everybody. My name's Katie Fielding, and I'm here this evening to talk to you about conservation grazing and my experience of using it across our chalk grassland sites. So a little bit about me. I am now also a nature-based solutions manager like Ben, but I previously was our conservation manager for our central area and had the pleasure of managing a lot of chalk grassland sites, many of which were across our North Downs area, so that very iconic part of Surrey. Many of the sites have different, requirements, issues, things to overcome, ways they need working. And one of our main habitat interventions was through conservation grazing. So for the next 10-15 minutes or so, I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about my experience of using grazing animals across this incredibly interesting and diverse section of sites and what we did with them. So where are we? We obviously have a large number of chalk grassland sites scattered across and around the North Downs area, and these are in a variety of conditions. Some of them are thriving, some of them are suffering a little with having too many what we call rank grasses and other dominating species, which kind of act a bit like a thug and push out our quite delicate chalk grassland species. So chalk grassland is very characteristic of having nutrient poor soils. So you get a very unique range of floral species that colonize these areas, and your more common species that need more nutrient rich soils don't do so well. But if they are able to colonize, then they quite easily choke out some of our more delicate species that we want to see, that variety and rareness and those characteristic species of our chalk grassland, and also might have scrub encroaching. So lots of chalk grassland sites in a variety of conditions. And where do we want to be? So we obviously want that chalk grassland to be thriving and well managed, but what does that management look like? We don't want it to be too heavy-handed. What we're trying and aiming for is functioning ecosystems, replicating natural processes where we can. So we don't want to be using lots of heavy machinery, having lots of human intervention when we don't need to, where that's not what our wild habitats or our nature reserves want, because what is wild these days? But yeah, looking for those functioning ecosystems and replicating natural processes where possible. But what does that actually look like? So we're looking for few of those rank grasses, what we refer to as rank grasses, where if you've got a lot of them on site, it's indicative of that the site hasn't been managed for a long time and nutrients levels are building up. A varied sward height, and by sward I mean kind of grass and vegetation height. We want lots of different heights and variety in those areas. We also want patches of bare ground. Where we can, we want to have rotational scrub, again replicating those natural processes where we can. So we want scrub to be establishing in areas, then we want to be able to knock it back and it move around and have that really dynamic area and habitat that's always changing and evolving, and with different species colonizing at different times, and none of it to ever really be standing still. We want to increase the chalk grassland flora and want to keep that variety of rare plants. We really do. So many different invertebrates are reliant on those various chalk species. There are lots of specialist species, and we want to have that abundant wildlife, that variety in Surrey and across our nature reserves and our different sites and habitats. So that probably all sounds a little bit complex, and how on earth are you able to achieve all of that? Well, the best way to achieve all of that is through conservation grazing, and that's the conclusion we've come to and how we try and manage a lot of our chalk grassland sites. However, it's not quite as simple as sticking a load of animals out on site and seeing what happens. There's lots to consider, from which animal to use. Are you using cows, sheep, goats, pigs? Lots of different considerations. Deer, obviously, in the case of Pirbright ranges, to density. So how many animals are you going to have out on a site? And then your timings as well. So dependent on the type of animal you're using, how many of them is really heavily going to influence how long and at what time of year you'll have those animals out on site as well. And all of this equates to a lot of work for our grazing team and our reserves management team about caring for those animals, choosing the right ones, and having them on at the right time of year to benefit our chalk grassland sites and many of our sites across Surrey. So I was going to talk to you a little bit about some of our grazing animals. I'm going to start with our beautiful belted Galloway cattle. So first thing to say about cows, it sounds obvious, but cows graze grass. So many people think that cows and our, especially conservation grazing cattle, will tackle scrub for us. They won't. They aren't browsers. Goats are browsers, but cows graze grass. They graze very differently to sheep. Sheep like to mow, so they go along the grass and they cut it all to a very uniform length, much like a lawnmower. Cattle graze very differently, but what they do fantastically is they keep dominant grasses at bay and help to strip nutrients out of those areas. So where we want to encourage those botanical herbaceous chalk grassland plants, we can do that by knocking the grasses back with our cattle. But there's so much more to our belted Galloway cattle than just their diet. It's a whole host of things about what they do. First of all, it's about the way that they eat their grass. So they have a specially adapted tongue, which they wrap around the grass and they tear it and tug at it. So this is helping to create lots of variety in our sward or grass length instantly, because by tearing at it like that with their tongue, they're leaving jagged edges, different lengths, they're pulling at the roots. Some are going to come out entirely, some are going to be left partially exposed, which is both going to be knocking the grass back, but also creating undulating ground, that different heights. We've got roots exposed, we've got grass levels, they've got different patches of temperature. So just looking at this picture, you can see there are shaded parts now, bumpy areas where the soil is in the sun is going to be a far greater temperature than down in that shaded patch. They also trample through the vegetation. So while they're not browsers, what they do is they are large herbivores, large animals in our landscape. So they're bashing against the scrub and trees coming through, stamping on the edges of bramble piles, and then they're also leaving hoof prints as well. So we want to achieve having some bare ground, and a great way to do that is through trampling the ground and hoof prints of our animals. Now, if we go too far, then we create too much damage, which we call poaching, where we're creating too much bare ground and we can churn it all up and we're damaging the soil and the plants that are underneath. Now, we don't want to go that far, but we do want to disturb the soil. We want to have that bare ground, and it really is quite a delicate balancing act. But what all of this is doing is creating that variety. We're creating that different age, different height, different temperatures, and that variety in niches and micro habitats and micro niches for a whole host of invertebrates that I couldn't name, but are just inhabiting and existing in those different temperature changes and dampness levels. So a teeming world created by our cattle just purely moving through the landscape. And so just touching a little bit more on scrub, as I've said, the cattle aren't scrub controllers, but they will take a little bit of scrub. And what they'll do is maybe take 5 to 10% of the scrub. Maybe our animals are close to that 10% or just a little bit over because they've lived their whole lives out grazing on our various habitats. But while they may not be controlling the scrub, what they are doing is influencing it. So if you look at this picture here, this cow's moved through, wrapped its tongue around that young pine sapling and stripped off all of the needles, and then also just nibbled off the top growth of the left-hand side one as well. And while this might not instantly kill the pine tree, it's certainly going to stunt its growth, make it grow differently, and maybe it'll ultimately die or won't grow to quite as large as it would have unnibbled and investigated by this animal. And so, yeah, it's just having that influence on the scrub around it. And while they might not be eating it all and really pushing it back, they're still influencing their landscape and moving through, knocking scrub back in areas, and stuff's growing up behind them. So helping to create and replicate those natural processes and that dynamic environment that we're looking for. And also, I mean, I don't have hours and hours this evening, so I will spare you just how fantastic I think dung is, and dung beetles and all the beneficial invertebrates that help to keep at bay our pest invertebrates, like flies and various things. But dung is such a valuable habitat, niche, micro niche, whatever you want to call it, for so many invertebrates through all of their life stages as well. Many benefit from it, none more so than the very aptly named yellow hairy dung fly in the picture here. Yeah, it's incredibly valuable. Dung beetles, they're eating it, they're burying it for their young, a whole host of things. However, dung can be much less valuable as well, and that's because of our wormers. So for our domesticated pets, our livestock, we treat them for wormers, and we think that's, you know, we're doing the right thing for those animals, and there is a welfare reliance on them. But a wormer is an insecticide, and so when we worm these animals, all of that insecticide comes out in their dung and is lethal to many of our beneficial invertebrates as well. And what SWT do is they don't proactively use these wormers. What we do is take fecal samples and assess them for a fecal egg count, looking for the presence of these parasites and wormers. And if it gets to dangerous levels, then we then treat them reactively when we know they need them, rather than constantly supplying them. And we'll take the animals off-site as well to limit how harmful that dung can be to our beneficial invertebrates. So all of our dung can hopefully remain that beneficial and fantastic habitat on our sites as well. We also breed all our own cattle, and the benefit of this is that we get to know them their whole lives. We know what they've been exposed to, how they've been treated, what their temperaments are like, and then we can assess them for what site they would be best suited for, or range of sites that they'd be most suited for. And as I said before, it may mean that they'll graze a little bit more scrub because they're more familiar with it. It's not an alien food type for them. They've seen their mother eating it as well as those around them. It's not something scary and new. And their gut flora, they might be more well developed for it because of that. So they might help us out on those habitats a little bit more. And here's me shamelessly meeting this newborn calf as well, just because I can. I'll also mention a little bit about nutrient cycling. So when cattle are out grazing, they're helping to strip some of the nutrients out of the site. So knocking back those grasses, knocking back the nutrients to let those poorer nutrient species come through in that variety. By eating that nutrient-rich grass, they're removing some of that nutrients, that energy, and what they dung out is more nutrient poor. But what they also do is nutrient cycle. So as demonstrated in the photo here, the cattle move into the grassland area, they eat a lot of the grass, they then move into a different area of the site, lay up, probably in the shade, in a different section, and when they get up, they're more likely to dung. And then although it's more nutrient poor than what went in, they're depositing nutrients in a different area. So as well as stripping nutrients out of the grassland, they're also cycling nutrients around different parts of the site. And where they choose to lay up and dung will change over the time that they're on site. So they're also helping to nutrient cycle. And again, just helping with that dynamic, constantly moving natural processes of what we're trying to replicate, making it that living, breathing site that never sits still without too much human intervention. But does it actually work? I hear you say. Now, this isn't the first picture of cotton grass you've seen today. So as demonstrated in this photo, on the left-hand side, you have a site that has been grazed, and on the right-hand side, it hasn't. And as you can see, the common cotton grass is much, much more prolific on the side where it has been grazed. And the eagle-eyed view will spy the pink blob in the bottom of the screen as well, which is a heath-spotted orchid. And actually, that side of the site is covered in the orchids. It just hasn't really come out. So you can really see the variety in species being increased by the conservation grazing across these sites. And again, another comparison picture. On the left-hand side, you've got grazing. On the right-hand side, you don't. On the right-hand side, it's very uniform. It's long grass. The temperature is going to be quite uniform across the top and then lower underneath the vegetation layer. But there's not a huge variety in species in there, and it's all just quite normal and plain. On the left-hand side, you've got tussocks of different sizes, you've got grass at different levels, at different lengths, you've got bare ground, you've got hoof prints, you've got areas of bare ground that are being hit by sun, you've got patches in the shade, you've got little craters that will fill with water. You've got that variety. And as we've been saying, that the key to biodiversity and bioabundance is variety. We need those really subtle little differences, those micro habitats, those niches, for a whole variety of different floristic and invertebrate species to start to colonize. And if we don't have much variety in our landscape, then we won't have much variety and biodiversity as either. So that's what we're trying to achieve, that variety, those little differences, even in relatively small spaces, will help to facilitate more biodiversity. So having spoke a lot about our belted Galloway cattle, I'm also just going to run through our breeding programme of sheep as well, which is very exciting. So over the last couple of years, we have been running an innovative breeding programme where we are crossing Wiltshire Horns and Boree sheep. And why would we do that, I hear you cry? Well, the Wiltshire Horns are wool-shedding, big, relatively docile, lowland grass sheep. And the Boree are small, with wild deer-like behaviour, a more primitive breed, which is an excellent browser, which, again, we do have scrub problems. We do need to be pushing back that scrub and have that browsing facility. Very hardy and can shed its own wool. And by crossing those two species, we're aiming to create a medium-sized sheep that's hardy, sheds its own wool with a docile nature, and will browse as well as graze. Sounds great. Sounds like the perfect additional conservation grazing animal tool to add to our toolbox. So what we're going for is that there will be no shearing required, which takes up a lot of time and money for the grazing team, as well as getting in external providers. There's less risk of fly strike, so a reduction in chemical pour, again, a reduction in the need to use harmful insecticides for our invertebrates across our sites. The short fleece in winter, so less likely to get caught in brambles or scrub. And for anyone who's had any dealings with sheep, they'll know that they love nothing better than to get themselves stuck in brambles or scrub. And it's great for chalk grassland, as they will graze out the dominant coarse grass species and thatch and the like kind of strawy layers that your grasslands can see sometimes, helping to create that bare ground and space for those less dominant, more nutrient poor chalk grassland species. They will also browse the scrub and help push that back and help control it. They're stripping out nutrients in the same way that the cattle are and moving the nutrients around the site. And they're also, what's really important is they're light on their feet. They're smaller animals, so they're less damaging than the cattle, which means they can stay on sites for longer in wet conditions. You know, it does reach a point in the winter where we just can't have the cattle out on our chalk grassland sites anymore, or they have to be on for such short periods of time because they're just churning. While we want to have a little bit of poaching, a little bit of bare ground creation and rough up the ground, too much is really, really damaging. Whereas the sheep, just being that much smaller, that much lighter, they cause much less damage and can be on for longer, which again helps make our operation more robust against climate change, where we're having the warmer, drier summers, we're also having the wet, cold, the wet, warmer winter months as well. So this gives us options to be able to continue our conservation work. And do go and have a read of the article. It was published in Sur Nature last year, I think. It's a really lovely project doing great innovative conservation work, so do look into it a bit more. Now, at this point, hopefully you're like, conservation grazing is amazing. Why aren't we doing it more? Like, wow, what a fantastic thing. Well, we also have to consider the risks too, and it's actually a really delicate balancing act. If we implement too heavy grazing, so if we have too many animals on a site for too long, this will produce a uniform lawn-like grassland. Again, you could have poached areas heavily churned up, have soil erosion, water runoff, which overall the whole area will support a lot less wildlife, a lot less biodiversity. We don't want to remove all of the scrub. We don't want to knock it back entirely. We want some areas of scrub and that taller grass, and we need some tall areas. We need that variety. And it's all incredibly important for a range of wildlife. Again, so too little grazing may eventually result in those rank grasses and scrub encroaching and taking over. So we can't have too heavy a grazing, but we can't have too light a grazing either. It is a delicate balancing act. But luckily, SWT runs a really sophisticated grazing operation where we consider our options. We are constantly evaluating conditions on site. What worked last year may not work the following year, and those tools and options are considered year on year to get it right for the sites and how we tackle them. And we manage that grazing to create a varied grassland structure, be it on chalk grassland sites or heathland sites like the one in the picture. We are always aiming to create that varied sward or mosaic of habitats by deploying what I like to think of as our conservation silver bullet. And also just wanted to say a little bit about our no fence grazing collars. I know lots of people have supported our grazing appeals as well in the past, which enabled us to purchase more of these fantastic no fence grazing collars. It does what it says on the tin. It enables us to graze areas where we don't have fences, so we don't have to fence them in, which has meant we've been able to increase the areas we can graze, target grazing areas as well, do what we call mob grazing, where we really need animals to tackle areas. It makes tracking the animals much easier, which is more time efficient for staff, but also better for welfare of the animals. Makes our operation again just that much more slick and robust, and easier for our volunteers, cattle checkers, who go out and check these animals for multiple days, throughout the summer and winter time and it all can be checked through an app, which is fantastic. And none of this would have been possible without funding. The grazing operation would be much smaller, much more time intensive, and areas would go ungrazed and undergrazed, and we wouldn't be able to create that living, breathing, constantly moving and evolving habitats, trying to replicate those natural processes. And it would mean we would have to have a lot more human intervention. So a big thank you from me and the Trust and the Reserves and Grazing team, as we wouldn't be where we are without those that are constantly funding and supporting us and making our jobs so fascinating. What a privilege to be able to get out onto these sites and do such fantastic work for them. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Katie. That was excellent presentation. Thank you so much. I've got a couple of questions for you. So to start off with, will the cattle always be on one of Surrey Wildlife Trust sites, or do they spend time in a regular farm environment as well?
That's an excellent question. So The animals move around from different sites. So what we find is that in the summer months, the cattle are usually out on our heathland sites and helping to graze back purple moorgrass and molinia, as well as other grasses. And then in late summer, autumn time, and into the winter, the cattle are then moved onto our chalk grassland sites. Now, so some animals may well just be cycled round, but most usually come back to one of what we call our layback land sites. And we've got a couple of those around the county, one of them being Pond Farm on Wisley Common on the A3 M25 junction. We also have a farm just outside of Guildford called Bonhurst Farm. And so lots of animals will come back to those when it would be damaging for them to be out on our sites.
Lovely, thank you, Katie. We've had a question that's come in about Blackdown. So somebody said, I see these cows at Blackdown all the time. They don't seem to have any interest in people. How many cows at Blackdown? Now, Blackdown isn't actually one of Surrey Wildlife Trust's reserves. It's a National Trust reserve. We would love to be the only ones with belted Galloways, but other landowners also use them, don't they, Katie?
They do, yeah. I mean, they are a fantastic grazing animal for conservation purposes and the kind of habitats that we have in Surrey. So yes, there are other herds in the county.
Thank you. And then we've got a question which may be a part answer from you, Katie, and also from you, Ben. So just a question relating to deer, cattle and sheep. Will culls have to take place to keep the numbers optimal?
So that is something that we do have to do. I'll let Ben answer specifically on the deer one, but yes, and that is a part of having grazing animals. You do have to keep the numbers optimum, and sometimes animals do have to be culled.
Yeah, just to add to that, Casey's absolutely right. In our deer our red deer are enclosed. We introduced red deer into that landscape. We didn't capture them in there, so we are responsible for them. And our only management intervention, given that we don't have wolves and we don't have large apex predators, is we need to maintain the herd structure and the numbers as well. So that's really important for us. The behaviors that I mentioned before about how single sex herds for the rest of the year, either side of the rut, they split off and behave differently and go into different areas and browse and graze, lay up, impact on different areas, poach as well, like Katie was saying as well, beneficially in some areas. All of that behavior is a fine balance with the designations that we have on the site. We could easily have 400, 500 deer in there as a parkland deer reserve, but that might be to the detriment, or that would be to the detriment of the valley mire system, some of the more sensitive species. So we do need to actively cull our herd at the appropriate time, also dealing with welfare issues as well. So we are very much responsible for that, and that, as Katie said, is really fundamental in the way we manage our wild herd, certainly on our estate and actually in the wider landscape. That is how deer populations are currently managed.
That's great, thank you. I just wanted to end with one final question. There aren't any other questions in the Q&A, but just to say, obviously we have cows, sheep and deer that we use at Surrey Wildlife Trust. But I wondered whether there are any other grazing animals that you've seen within your careers or that you would like to see in Surrey, Ben and Katie.
I mean, there certainly are other species. There are other breeds. So I obviously mentioned goats, and all grazing animals that are used in conservation settings have their pros and cons. And obviously, a massive pro of goats is just how they tackle the scrub. One of the, let's say, cons of having goats is that they are quite intelligent and very apt at escaping, and then also then managing to avoid being recaptured or brought in off-sites. And some of my favourite early memories of working for the Trust is watching our previous farm manager running around a heathland site, tripping multiple times, trying to help herd up this group of goats that we used to have. So yeah, goats are fantastic, but are quite tricky animals to work with. So then pigs as well. I think Ben might have memories of when the Trust had pigs as well. although that was before my time.
Yeah, I think this is a whole other webinar, Sarah, but definitely, yeah. So I've first-hand experience of I used to be in the grazing team in a previous role with the trust, and the aroma of goat urine when you're doing some foot trimming is horrendous. But with regards to managing the landscape long term, yeah, my most recent exposure is to things like bison, which I know Kent Wildlife Trust are leading on, and just the theme of large herbivores, as Katie was saying, in the landscape is critical to the way that the Wildlife Trust sees things moving forward. And certainly for us in our current grazing regime, yes, we've got the Red Deer project. We have our livestock, our domesticated livestock out in the wild, managing our estate and the areas we need to manage for conservation. But there are other programs of work around rewilding. Rewilding Europe is a big movement around the Tauros program about bringing aurochs, an ancient cattle breed, back into the landscape. Yeah, like I say, we could go into great detail and depth about that, but I've firsthand seen bison in a landscape. I've seen conic ponies, and the larger herbivores that we aren't necessarily so used to in Britain, being very, very effective, efficient at landscape scale restoration. So yeah, hopefully we can catch up with our European counterparts and lead the way on some areas as well.
Thank you, Ben. And I'm now going to hand over to Amy. That's all the time that we've got for questions today. So over to you, Amy.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Ben and Katie, for such a fantastic pair of presentations this evening, and especially thanks to the team of staff behind the scenes that help, or the technical side running as well. We really appreciate that. So I know we've slightly gone over time, but I hope you'll humour me just for one more minute as I bring this to a close. It's really important that we want to continue engaging with our supporters. So please do, if you found tonight interesting, please do have a look out on our website for future events and webinars and ways that we can keep in touch with you and let you know about how your support is helping the work of the Trust. And before we close, I just wanted to end on a question that we often get asked by a lot of our supporters, which is, how can I help? And what more can I do for nature in Surrey? And there's many ways, but I'm just going to focus on kind of 3 this evening very quickly. And that is, if you are in a position to support us financially now, we would really appreciate that. We would really appreciate those that are in that position to please consider donating to our Save Surrey's Nature appeal that we have going on at the moment. We have an aim to try and raise £1 million over the next couple of years to really help us achieve more in Surrey. You've seen tonight there's so much going on, but we need to do more. We need to continue to scale and accelerate to help save Surrey's nature. And we will send a link to you after the webinar for those of you that are able to do that. And if you aren't able to support financially now, you could perhaps consider leaving a gift in your will to Surrey Wildlife Trust. We hugely appreciate and rely on these legacies to really push forward the work that we do in the Trust. And if you'd like to hear more about this and learn about how you can leave a gift in your will to Surrey Wildlife Trust, please do get in touch with us and let us know about that. And then finally, one of the most powerful things we think that you can do that really doesn't cost anything is to talk to other people, your friends, your neighbours, your colleagues, about taking action for nature. And we really know at the Trust that individuals can be hugely powerful by spreading that word. It's so important about looking after nature at home, within schools, in your work and your communities, and really creating that momentum and that movement for change, and how you can help us in being ambassadors for the Trust in helping us getting that message across. And really, so we have an ongoing legacy for the benefit of nature in Surrey. So lastly, I just want to say a big thank you. We really appreciate everything that you do for nature in Surrey in whatever way that you choose to support us at Surrey Wildlife Trust. Thank you for your ongoing support. And we've reached the end of the webinar. So all that's left for me to say is I hope that you have a pleasant evening, and thank you very much for attending. Good night.